Hi everyone and welcome back to my Qwik framework tutorial. In this one we're going to complete our Qwik text field component. Before jumping right to it, I'm simply going to change this class from textbox to textfield. You can give it whatever name you want, and we're going to jump right to creating our CSS file. So the first thing I'll do is give the text field position relative. Then I want to access the input inside our text field like this. I'll give it a height of 60 pixels, width of 220, padding left of 30 pixels, border of 0. We'll give it a black color, but I'll use an RGBA here to pass in opacities of 0, 0, and 0 for black, and I'll say an opacity of 0.9. The background will be transparent, and we're going to remove the outline by saying outline none. If we go to our website, we can see we got this, our text field without an outline. I'm going to continue by accessing the underline inside the text field. I'll give it position absolute. We're going to position it at the beginning and bottom of our text field. So I'm going to say left 0 and bottom 0. Give it a width of 100% of our text field, a height of 2 pixels, and we're going to transform, scale our X to 0. We will rescale this X when we click on the text field and it will become active. The final thing will be to give it transition of 0.4 seconds. This will be, of course, to set the time for the scaling animation. Now that we got that, I'll access a few more things. This will be our label and our span inside our text field. I'll give them position absolute as well. Color of, again, RGBA. We're going to use black as well, but with 50% opacity. Then we're going to move it 50% to the top. Again, set the transition time for this 0.4 seconds. And we're going to remove the pointer events. Now I'm going to access them separately. I'll give it a top of 50%, left of 0. Now I'll do the same for the label right here, and actually should be a comma right here. So I'll give it a top of 50%, a left of 30 pixels, and I'll say color black. I'm gonna go to my text field right here, and before the underline, I'm going to add a label for text field, and right here we'll simply say username. Save that. Go back, we can see we get this. The only thing we now need to handle is the animation when the input becomes active. I'm gonna say text field, and right here I'll say is input focus. And if it is, I'm going to access underline. And I'll say first of all transform scale X back to 1, so it will take the entire screen, and we'll give it a background color of black. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but for the span, I'll simply give it a color of, again, RGBA and our black with 90% opacity. And lastly, I'll do the same thing for the label. We're going to move it minus 40 pixels, minus 40 pixels, scale to 0.8 the original, and give it a background color of black. For now, I'm going to save that and go back to my login.tsx, and I'm going to wrap this text field in another div. I'm going to give it a class name of input. Now I'll go to style.css of login right here in my login folder, and I'm going to access input. I'll give it margin top of 60 pixels, margin bottom of 40 pixels, and I'll give it a width 35%. If I now save that, we can see we get this animation. Actually, why is my label turning black? This should be color, not background color. Much better. As you can see, the label is going up, and we also scale it to be a little bit smaller, and the underline is showing up. Now we can move on to handling the functionality of our text field. So the first thing we'll do is to pass properties to our text field. In order to be able to pass properties to this component, because we will use the same component to create every text field in our website, we will need to pass some properties to it. I'm going to create an interface, name it text field props. This will simply hold the name and data type of every property we want to pass to our component. We're just gonna have two properties here, a name, which will be a string, and a reference, which will be a ref element. And we also need to import ref right here. This ref element is simply going to reference to our HTML element, and we can later get all the properties we want from it, like the text, and we can do it from our login. Here we're going to pass to this component props, and I'm going to say those will be text field props. If we do that, we can see we now get an error in my login because we need to pass in two props. to pass those props, I'm going to import the useRef hook from Qwik, and we're going to create a reference. This will be a simple variable, so this will not be a state variable as known in React. We will see how we can handle and create those in a moment. I'm going to say username, and it's going to be equal to useRef. I'm going to create another one for the password because we will have another text field. And right here, we can simply pass in name, which will be username, and reference, which will be username. I can now copy this entire div right here, make this one password, and we're gonna give this the reference of password. All that's left to do is to go to our text field, and right here in our label, I'll actually say it equals to props.name. Just like so. If we save that and go to login, we can see we got two different text fields. One of them is password and the other is username. We now passed properties to our component. Let's handle our text field input. The first thing I'll do is give a ref here to the input, props.reference. This, as I said, will help us link this HTML object in our login page. And right here, we're going to use the onInput function, which is a Qwik function, and we can tell that by this $sign right here. This function gets an input event. And right here we can get our data by saying e.data, so I'm going to log it e.data. If I'll now save it and go back, open the console, we can now see that everything I type is being logged letter by letter. If I'm going to delete a letter, it's going to return null. We can handle this input by simply checking if e.data is null. In this case, we get a backspace right here. In any other case, this is an input. We're going to store this input right here in a state variable, similar to React state variable, just that here we get a little bit of a different name. But the idea is still the same. It is a variable that we can use to update our view as things happen. So in order to create such a variable, I'm going to import use store. If you're familiar with React, instead of use state, this use store right here does exactly the same thing. And we're going to simply create our state. So I'm going to say const state is going to be equal to use store. And right here, I'll create a value, which for now will be empty. I'll create another one which will say show placeholder, which for now will be set to true, and the final one will be is valid to indicate whether our text field is valid or not. And for now it will also be valid because we don't want to show any warnings of invalid text in the beginning before the user got the chance to interact with it. So here, if we get a backspace, we'll simply say state.value. It's going to be equal to state.value, and we're going to slice the last character right here because this is a backspace. In case this is an input, we'll simply add it to our value, so plus equals to e.data. Now the state variable value right here contains the text of our text field at any given moment. That means we can now perform any kind of validations on this text as the user types. Before we do this though, I want to render this icon according to our property name as well. I'll simply say props.name equals to username. If this is the case, we'll pass user icon. If not, we will pass lock icon. Save that, go back. We can see the username now has the user icon and the password the lock icon. What I would like to do next is to remove this placeholder if we have some text right here and we dismiss it. As you can see, it still remains. In order to do this, I'm going to simply conditionally render this label right here. I'll say if state.show placeholder. If this is the case, we're going to return this label. If not, I'm going to simply return a div right here. Now this placeholder will only show if the show placeholder state variable is true. We can call another Qwik function on this input, which will be onFocus. Right here, I'll simply say state.show placeholder will be true. I will reset it every time our user clicks on the text field, and we can call onFocusOut, which is another Qwik function. And here I'll simply check if state.value.length is bigger than 0. We'll simply say state.showPlaceholder is going to be equal to false. Save that. Actually, I'm going to completely restart my app here. Sometimes you need to do it. And if we go back and reload and type some text right here and dismiss, we can see the label is gone. If now I will remove this text, the label will come back. So this is exactly what we want. The last thing we need to implement is the input validation. In order to do this, I'm going to access the class name, and right here I'll simply check if props.name is our username. If it is, we'll check if our state.value.length is 0. If it is the case, we're simply going to return a string here, which will be empty. If it is not, we can perform some more checks. Here, if state.value length is bigger than 3, we're going to return valid. If not, we'll return invalid for our class name. There's really nothing complicated here at all. All we did is to check if the name is username, then we see if the username text field is empty, and if it is empty, it will have no class name, which means it will be just black, the normal color. If it's not empty, then we can see if this value is bigger than 3. If it is, we'll give it a class name of valid, which will implement to show this text field as green. Otherwise, we can say invalid and we'll show it as red. Now, all we need to do is to implement those two classes. So I'll go to my CSS again. I'll access invalid. I'll give it a background color of red. And actually right here, we'll say text field and we can check is input valid. If so, we can access underline and we'll give it a background color of green. We'll do the exact same thing for the span right here, color green, and the same for the label, color green. Now we can do exactly the same thing, but for the invalid, so I'm going to copy everything, change this to invalid, and if it is invalid, we'll simply give it red. Now if we save this and try it out, let's see what's going on here. Right, we forgot to handle the password. So in case we get the password, we'll check for the value.length. And I'll say if it's bigger than 0, then we can validate our password, and if not, I'll just return an empty string here. And here to see if our password is valid, I'm going to use a regular expression. I'll just paste it here. It will be in the video description. It simply checks for one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, a number, and it needs to be between 8 and 20 characters. So here we can simply say if state.value.mat password reg. If it is the case and it's matching, we'll say valid, and otherwise we'll say invalid. And now we should be able to validate both our username and our password. I go back and I'll type something, 1, 2, we can see this is invalid, and 3, 4 becomes valid. Same for the password, we can see we don't get a valid password until we enter at least 8 characters, one lowercase and one uppercase letter. So for now, this is a good enough result. We still got some more things to work on. For example, if I will select the entire text right here and delete it, what happened here is we simply got a null return from our own input function, and we deleted a single character without taking into consideration that our user deleted the whole thing. And as you can see, if I'll just type in one character here, you can see the password is valid. This is because our state variable still contains all the input from before. So in the next video, we will make this text box completely bulletproof, and we'll create the register form as well, which means we will be adding some more types to our text field. This will be all for this one, guys. Hope you learned a little bit about the similarities between React and Qwik, and also a little bit about how you can work with the Qwik framework. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one.